Week 2 was one of the best fantasy football weeks ever for the quarterback position. We had 18 quarterbacks score at least 18 fantasy points last week. 16 of those guys scored over 20 fantasy points. By far the highest I've seen in forever. So today we're going to be going through all the quarterbacks and all the matchups to try to determine which one of these guys are the best ones to start in week 3. Now, typically in all of our start-sit videos, we'll always have a few underdog pick'ems. But I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. There is nothing on the board right now that I absolutely love, so I'm not about to force it. But that doesn't mean that I don't want you guys ready to walk away with a ton of money in 2023. Just last night on Underdog, I won $600. Last week, Kyle won over $2,000. Now, in case you haven't heard yet, we're using OddsJam for all these picks this year, and it is absolutely paying off. But we're no longer going to rush to put picks in videos. We're going to make sure we find the best ones each and every week. So don't be surprised if you start to see some of these pick'ems in other shows throughout the week. But like I said, we want to make sure you're ready to go. So head over to Underdog Fantasy, sign up for a new account, use referral code HEADLINERS when you do so, and then just make that initial minimum $10 deposit. We're actually going to match your deposit all the way up to $100, plus you're going to get a free mystery pick'em in your account. What is a mystery pick'em, you ask? Well, it's a random player that needs like 1 total yard in order to hit. It's a great way for you to get jump started into winning some money, so be sure to sign up now. The link is down below in the description, but let's go ahead and head into all of the matchups here in week 3. We're kicking it off Thursday Night Football with the New York Football Giants and San Francisco 49ers. And I really feel like I can speak for a lot of NFL football watchers when I say this about the New York Giants. Who the hell are you? For 6 quarters to start this season, they looked like one of the worst teams overall in the NFL. Then they go out and explode for 31 second half points and erase a 20-point deficit to beat the Arizona Cardinals. Now, rumors have already started circulating whether or not Brian Daboll took over some play calling from Mike Kafka during that game. They're saying that he didn't, but he sure had a play sheet in his hand a lot the second half of that ballgame. But irregardless, the offense looked way better. Daniel Jones was scrambling, throwing the ball deeper down the field to the likes of Jalen Hyatt. They looked way more confident. Daniel Jones ended up throwing for 321 yards, 2 touchdowns, and added 59 yards rushing and a touchdown on the ground. He was the #1 overall quarterback in fantasy football for week 2, and he did it in basically a half of football. But what offense shows up on Thursday night, especially in a matchup against one of the best defenses in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers? Now, luckily, as of right now, the San Francisco 49ers are allowing the 10th most passing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks. Now we know that we may not have Saquon Barkley in this backfield for a while. I just hate Thursday night football. I hate having to face the San Francisco 49ers defense at home in primetime football. But the ceiling is there for Daniel Jones. We just saw it, but there's also quite a bit of risk. He's still going to be a top 15 play for me, though, this week. What about Brock Do-'em Dirty Purdy? He's coming off his first regular season game in his career without at least 2 touchdowns in a game. Figures, right? It's because I had him ranked higher last week than I've probably ever ranked him before. And I really feel that was the case last week because they didn't have to throw the ball very much. They were finding so much success on the ground. Through the first 2 games of the season, they've accumulated 347 yards rushing. Damn! This will by far still be the biggest test so far this season for the New York defense. In week 1, they had to deal with heavy rain. Week 2, it was the Arizona Cardinals. San Francisco is a whole nother level. Plus, if you watched the San Francisco game, you saw Brock Purdy take a few shots down the field that he just barely missed. I'm talking about missing by a manscaped hair on some deep balls to a few of his wide receivers. Those are throws that he will make more times than not. Plus, Plus, don't forget, George Kittle has pretty much worked himself back to close to 100%. There will always be risk on short weeks, but Purdy is still going to be another top 15 option for me once again this week. But now we're going to big Kirko stroll into some Sunday football where we have the Indianapolis Colts at the Baltimore Ravens, and all eyes right now are on the head of Anthony Richardson. Dude, we could have worded that a little bit better. But I understand what they meant. He's currently going through the concussion protocol this week, and our fingers are absolutely crossed that he can play. This kid was on pace for a huge game in week 2. Dude had like 18 fantasy points and only played in 18 offensive snaps. Just think about that. He was on pace for like, I don't know, a crap ton of fantasy points in week 2. And we're really starting to see him utilize his legs more in order to get those points. 13 rushing attempts in 2 games now that have equated to 75 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. That alone is enough to make this guy a weekly start when he is healthy. Baltimore, still a pretty solid defense. They're allowing 13.3 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, so not a whole lot. Let's see if we can get Anthony Richardson out of concussion protocol, though, because if he's fully healthy, more than likely he's going to be a start in fantasy football. As for Lamar, it was nice to see him bounce back in week 2. 237 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 54 yards rushing. Sure, the ceiling may be a little bit lower than what it has been in years past, but I will gladly accept a slightly lower ceiling if it means we get to have Lamar Jackson healthy all season long. Something else that will keep him healthy, not getting sacked all the time. He was sacked 0 times in week 2. Something that has only happened twice to him now in Baltimore over the past 3 seasons, the last time being week 2 of last year. But what I'm really loving so far here early in the season is his huge increase in his completion percentage. For his career, 64%. So far through 2 games, 75%. It helps so much in a lower volume passing offense if he can be more efficient. And he's going to get an opportunity to do it again this week in a matchup against one of only 9 teams in the NFL that allow over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and a team that allowed almost 400 yards passing last week to rookie quarterback CJ Stroud. Lamar Jackson is still someone that we're starting each and every week, which will take us over to Cleveland now for the Tennessee Titans and Cleveland Browns. And man, I don't know, it's going to take me some time to get over this Nick Chubb news. I was not stable last night during Monday Night Football, I will tell you that. And you really have to think, though, for Deshaun Watson, he's in line for a higher ceiling now, right? I mean, they just lost the best running back in the NFL. Don't argue with me about that. I'm emotional right now, damn it. But their next few games are against teams that are easier to throw on, so that's great. 3 straight games at home and a bye week to kind of right the ship. And I'm not going to read too much into last night's game because the Pittsburgh defense actually showed up the way that we had expected them to all season long. They just didn't do it in week 1. Amari Cooper hasn't been 100% healthy. He'll start to get a little bit healthier as time goes on. And now they get a matchup going up against Tennessee that allows over 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. He's gonna be right there in that QB 12-ish area for this week. And I'm hoping for vintage Watson to return. As for Ryan Tannehill, I just can't yet, right? He played well last week, but his entire day was basically made up of 2 big plays. A 70-yard bomb to Treylon Burks and a 12-yard rushing touchdown. Now, that was only his 3rd rushing touchdown since the end of 2021 and the longest completion he's had in a game since 2020. Now he gets to go on the road against one of the league's top defenses in Cleveland, and they're only allowing 7.2 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And you got to remember, that number would be even lower if it wasn't for the huge missed tackle George Pickens touchdown in week 2. There's just too many other better options there. I'm not starting Ryan Tannehill. But now we'll head over to Detroit for the Falcons and Lions. And I kind of put Desmond Ridder right there with Ryan Tannehill, right? Capable, sure. just not consistent enough to really go out there and feel good about. Now, he just had a great week too. He finished as the quarterback 10 overall, had 237 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and then added 39 yards on the ground with a rushing touchdown as well. It's the running, though, that kind of has me wondering here. In week 2, he had 10 rushing attempts, which is more than double his career average per game, and the rushing touchdown was the very first of his NFL career. He's not a quarterback that we can rely upon weekly when it comes to rushing upside like that. Now, maybe it continues, and if it does, he for sure becomes an option middle of the season, but I'm not buying the 9 fantasy points that he got on the ground in week 2 as the new normal in Atlanta. Now, this week he is going up against the Detroit Lions, so if you play in some of those larger leagues, the 2 quarterback leagues, the Superflex leagues, honestly, I don't hate this matchup. Opposing quarterbacks tend to perform against the Lions, but Desmond Ridder just has a lot of risk. As for Jared Goff, though, he has once again shown you that he has the opportunity to be a weekly top 12 option at the position, and it's the volume that allows that. He's going to be right around 35 plus attempts each and every week. He has one of the best wide receivers in football in Amon-Ra. He has multiple complementary wide receivers that can spread out the offense like Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond, and he has a tight end that can help move the chains and extend drives. The addition of Sam Laporta may not be huge as far as fantasy football is concerned, but from a Lions offense perspective, it's absolutely huge. He had 4 first down receptions just last week alone, and that's going to help this Lions offense stay on the field. Absolutely sucks that they lost David Montgomery, but that could lead to more passing in the next few weeks. Now they're going to face off against the Atlanta Falcons, who just gave up 3 passing touchdowns last week to Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers. Definitely something that Goff is capable of as well. But speaking of Jordan Love and the Packers, let's head up to Green Bay for the New Orleans Saints and Green Bay Packers. And here we go once again with Taysom Hill. He was on the field for 31 offensive snaps, only had 9 in week 1. But that resulted in Derek Carr only playing 90% of the snaps. But don't let that fool you. In week 1, Derek Carr played in 95% of the snaps. However, due to the actual amount of plays that were run, he still was on the field for more snaps in week 2, despite playing a lower percentage. Carr just couldn't find the end zone, and honestly, he just didn't play that well. He missed too many open wide receivers. We love to see him going down the field consistently, but so far, it's almost been too much deep down the field throughout each game. We need a little bit more of that short to intermediate to just extend drives. We don't always need the 50-yard bomb down the field. It kind of makes me think that they're dialing up a ton of deep balls just because they want to play with their shiny new toy. Carr in 2023 has a completed air yards per completion of 8.5 yards. His prior career high was 6.6. The dude is just throwing his balls deeper than he ever has before. Pause. And he's going to have another decent opportunity to do it again this week, though, going up against Green Bay, who's allowing 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And this was the defense that just allowed Desmond Ridder to be the quarterback 10 overall last week. It's not a situation where I hate Derek Carr in week 3. As for Jordan Love, the dude is just a touchdown machine. Back-to-back weeks with 3 passing touchdowns, but what's crazy is the 3 touchdowns last week was only good enough to make him quarterback 16 overall in week 2. I would love to see what this kid could do with some healthy wide receivers and just a little bit more volume, but the volume is where the risk comes in because it's masked right now by touchdowns. But if we have a game here in the near future without multiple touchdown passes and a quarterback that's only throwing the ball 25 times a game, it could definitely backfire and hurt your fantasy football team. Now, Jayden Reed has been great in the absence of Christian Watson, and while Romeo Doubs is still not 100%. I still have to keep some moderate risk here, though, on Jordan Love until they can get overall healthier in this offense, especially considering they're going up against the 7th best passing defense in the NFL so far this season, a defense that's only allowing 9.5 fantasy points per game. game to opposing quarterbacks. Now, granted, that was against Ryan Tannehill and Bryce Young so far, but still overall a solid defense. But now we'll head down to Florida for Jacksonville and Houston. And don't look now, but CJ Stroud is showing a lot of people he can throw the ball just fine in the NFL. He went 30 of 47 for 384 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 2 against Indianapolis, and then finishes the quarterback 13 overall. He has no interceptions for the first 2 weeks of the season, and he's spreading the ball around great in this offense. Last week, he had 4 pass catchers with at least 7 targets. And I think it's apparent by now that the connection between him and Nico Collins is great to see as well. I know I haven't been right on every player so far here in 2023, but dang, it does feel pretty good to see Nico Collins performing like he has to start the season so far early in the year. One of my better calls of 2023. But what about this matchup against Jacksonville? It's really not that bad. Jacksonville way easier to throw on than they are to run on. They allow the 8th most passing yards a game and the 8th fewest rushing yards per game. Obviously an opportunity for CJ Stroud to throw the ball once again. So far, fantasy quarterbacks are averaging 22.1 fantasy points per game against Jacksonville. And I'm moving CJ Stroud from that red color. Dude's moving to the yellow this week. I would love to see him start finding the end zone consistently and perform well on the road. If that's the case, maybe we really start considering CJ Stroud. He's not going to be in my top 12 this week, but he's definitely moving up the ranks quickly and could be a serviceable quarterback too for those of you in 2 quarterback leagues. But it's really kind of the opposite for Trevor Lawrence. He looks solid in week 1. Week 2, not so much, which is kind of puzzling, especially since it was against the Chiefs. We expected a little bit more offense in that game. We knew Trevor Lawrence was going to have to throw it a lot, and he did, over 40 times, but no touchdowns, and that absolutely killed us. But here's why I'm not overly worried. Trevor Lawrence actually threw 4 touchdown receptions in this game. However, they were all called back due to the receiver only getting 1 foot inbounds. That is like the definition of a fantasy football troll job right now. But big picture, the touchdown chances are there. So we kind of just need to chalk this one up as a down week and move on. Houston is a lot easier to run on than they are to throw on, but so far this year, they've allowed 18 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. We need the Trevor Lawrence bounce back this week. But we'll stay in Florida. We'll just go down to Miami for the Dolphins and Broncos, and dang, this Miami offense is just rolling right now. You try to slow down the pass, cool. They'll run for 150 on you. You try to slow down the run, good luck trying to stop Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle down the field. There's just so much speed in this offense, you can't stop it all every single week. Now, so far in this young season, the Broncos have contained the run more so than the pass. But like I've said each week, it is going to be really, really hard to ever sit a healthy Tua Tagovailoa in this offense. His ceiling is too high. It's matchup winning. We saw it in week 1. We've seen it multiple times in 2022. It's not like it's some fluke. When you have weapons like this, it's easy to start the quarterback each and every week. Now for Denver, don't look now, pace yourself a little bit, but Russ has got a damn chef apron on and he's starting to cook a little bit. His accuracy wasn't great in week 2, but Russ now has 5 passing touchdowns in the first 2 games of the season. A quarterback rating of 108.5 so far this year, and most importantly, he just had 6 rushing attempts for 56 yards. Arguably his second best game since joining the Denver Broncos. Now this run game, it's below average. He gets Jerry Jeudy back going forward, which is great. We expect Miami to go down the field and score some points, which means Russ is going to have to keep throwing for all 4 quarters. The industry is going to have Russell Wilson right around quarterback 20 this week. I'm going to have him just a little bit higher. But now we head up to Minnesota for the Chargers and Vikings, and this one is going to be my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. If you haven't gone to manscaped.com, what have you been doing with your life? We've been talking about these guys for 3 seasons now. So many people associate Manscaped with nothing but ball trimmers, but they have so much more to offer. Whether it's shampoo, body wash, deodorant, lip balm, freaking underwear, it doesn't matter. They have you covered. Be sure to head over there after this show is over. Use referral code HEADLINERS for 20% off your order and free shipping. But then we get back to this matchup here, and the Chargers may be losing, but Justin Herbert right now is still scoring fantasy points, and right now that's really all we care about around here. Back-to-back games with multiple touchdowns and finishes inside the top 12 at the position. It's really been thanks in large part to Keenan Allen. You know, that wide receiver that everyone told you all offseason was washed. Everyone except this community, of course. Because over the last couple games, Keenan Allen has 14 receptions for 187 yards and 2 touchdowns and has gotten 7 first downs in the first 2 games of the season. That is the definition of binky. He is definitely the Justin Herbert binky in this offense. Now he gets a matchup going up against Minnesota, who's allowed over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and this could very easily turn into a shootout between these two offenses. There are just so many big-time playmakers on this field right now, and neither team is overly reliant on running the football. We know we're not sitting Justin Herbert. What about Kirk Cousins? You can't afford to sit Kirk Cousins either. This guy right now is averaging 354 yards passing and 3 touchdowns a game through the first 2 weeks of the season. And it's not like he did it against a bunch of cream puffs. It was against Tampa Bay and Philadelphia. Now he gets to go home and face a Chargers team that's allowing almost 25 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. The addition of Jordan Addison into this offense has really helped raise the weekly ceiling of Kirk Cousins, which we absolutely love to see. More than likely, once again, Kirk Cousins is going to be inside my top 10 options at the quarterback position this week. But now let's head out to the Jets and the Patriots. I know there's a lot of people out there that are super ready for the matchup of these two offensive juggernauts. Now, to be fair, Mac Jones is way more fantasy relevant than Zach Wilson is at this point. I think everyone on earth knows not to start Zach Wilson in fantasy football. But do I really look at either of them and say, hey, I want to start them in fantasy? No, I really don't. I mean, it is nice that Mac Jones gets fantasy Bigfoot Devontae Parker back, but the touchdowns in this offense, they're just going to be super sporadic. Their play calling, albeit better than what it was in 2022, is still kind of odd at times. And the lack of creativity with Ramondre Stevenson is just plain weird each week. Regardless, though, the amount of fantasy viable quarterbacks in this league makes me not interested in either one of these guys in this matchup, especially knowing that Mac is going to be going on the road to face this Jets defense that's looking to kind of bounce back as is. Not interested in either quarterback in this matchup. Which will then take us down to Washington for the Commandos and the Buffalo Bills. And we already know, of course, we're starting Josh Allen. That's not really a weekly decision that many people have to make. We just saw Russell Wilson absolutely shred this Washington defense, so I'm really not that worried about Josh Allen. But what about Sam Howell? Another guy we loved coming out of the draft. We just knew he needed a chance to play and he would run with it. But it's not like that was some big, bold call. At one point in his college career, he was looked at as a potential top 5 overall pick. So what we're seeing right now is no fluke. 4 touchdowns through 2 games, and he's doing it without a fully healthy Terry McLaurin, and he hasn't even really utilized Jahan Dotson down the field very much yet. But he's spreading the ball around great. Just last week, there was 10 different players that all caught passes from Sam Howell, and now he's led them to back-to-back wins there in Washington. But this may be the first big test that he's had here of the season, going up against Buffalo. Buffalo is allowing less than 10 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and has allowed the 6th fewest passing yards per game in the league. Now, I also have to mention, they did that against Zach Wilson and Jimmy G. I get it, right? Not prolific passers. And Howell isn't safe by any means in this matchup. But really, if you're looking for a quarterback 2 option, I don't hate it this week in week 3. But now we'll head all the way back across the country to Seattle for the Carolina Panthers and Seattle Seahawks. And it may be early in the NFL season, but I'm just not pumped with what we've seen so far from Bryce Young just yet. And I know I was vocal during the NFL draft process when it came to the Carolina selection at number 1. But don't take this as me just writing off Bryce Young already. Of course not. Love Bryce Young. Had a chance to meet him at the Combine. He's an absolutely great kid. But for where this franchise was at, I just felt that CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson were more week 1 ready, if that makes sense. Bryce Young going to need a little bit of time to develop. And we're really starting to see that on the field too, right? He's only completed 59% of his passes. He came into the league with a lot of people talking about his accuracy. He's struggling there just a little bit. Only 2 touchdowns to 3 turnovers. Hasn't thrown for over 153 yards in a game yet. Now this matchup right here may be the best one he's had so far this season. Seattle has allowed 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but Bryce Young on the road in Seattle against the 12th man, that's not where I start him in fantasy football. Now, as for Seattle and Geno Smith, I am just so glad that last week our fantasy prayers were answered because we got 2022 Geno back. 328, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions in week 2 against the Detroit Lions, and that was a great way for him to bounce back. Now, so far in this young season, Carolina has shown that it's a little bit easier to run on them, to throw on them. However, this is going to be a big test for this Carolina defense. Teams are going to struggle stopping DK, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba each and every week. There should always be an open option somewhere in this offense. If I really had any concern here, it's that Seattle gets an early lead, and then they just run the ball a lot in the second half, which is really going to lower the ceiling of Geno Smith. I don't hate this start this week, though, of Geno Smith, especially being that it's at home. But there is going to be some slight concern, some slight risk this week that the ceiling just may be a little bit lower. Hopefully he can rack up multiple touchdowns in the first half, so if it happens, it doesn't hurt us this week. But now we'll head down to Arizona for the Cowboys and Cardinals, and for the first half of week 2, I was looking at Josh Dobbs like a dog does when you call its name and it goes, like, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. I was really starting to contemplate life choices, really wondering, is this guy this good? But honestly, that big run for a touchdown is not something we can expect from him each and every week. That was the first rushing touchdown of his career, and his 23-yard run was also a career high. But if we can't count on that type of rushing upside each and every week, the dude is a fringe top 20 play at best in this Arizona offense. Now let's add in the fact that he's going to be playing against Dallas this week, which is a top 3 defense in the league, who's only allowed 9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. No way can I trust Josh Dobbs this week. As for Dak, on the other hand, got no issues this week for Dak. He just hung 255 and 2 touchdowns on the Jets defense last week, which was still only good enough to finish his quarterback 17. But let's just say that the defense in Arizona, not as good as the Jets defense. Dak has the guys to get him down the field in Tony Pollard and CeeDee Lamb, and then multiple tight ends once he hits that 10-yard line. The touchdown opportunity should be there once again this week going up against Arizona, who's allowed over 24 fantasy points to opposing quarterback, including that Daniel Jones explosion in the second half that we talked about a little bit earlier. Dak will not be a quarterback that I'm avoiding by any means here in this matchup this week, which will then take us up to Kansas City for the Bears and the Chiefs. And the question here is not whether or not you should start Patrick Mahomes, because you already know you do, but this matchup going up against Chicago, probably going to be a pretty good one for Patrick Mahomes, and it's great that he has Travis Kelce back. This one right here is all about Justin Fields and whether or not you should panic. So let me put it to you this way. Have you ever seen somewhere, maybe on TV even, where there's like a really important button, but you don't want it accidentally pressed? So there's usually some sort of cover over the button to prevent that from happening. Well, I just lifted the damn cover on the button. I haven't pressed the button yet, but it is ready to be pressed. Now, has Justin Fields played well at all? Not really. He's shown a couple flashes here or there, but this offense overall is hot garbage. You have wide receivers lining up next to each other running the exact same route. You have coaches calling the same plays back to back. But most concerning, they're not even utilizing the legs of Justin Fields. They've only had 2 designed runs for Justin Fields now combined over these first 2 games. It's really starting to seem like they're making the same mistake in the NFL level that they're making here in the fantasy football level. People are looking at Justin Fields like he needs to perform as a pocket quarterback. He is not a pocket style quarterback. How can we see that, but they can't? If you want to put points on the board, you need to get Justin Fields on the move. It's not normal for a quarterback to look less comfortable the further he gets into his career. But as of right now, he looked way better in 2022. So really the question becomes, Who do you have to play over him? Are you willing to risk putting him on the bench and having him go off? If you have another good option, go for it. I can't blame you whatsoever, but just know and understand that there is risk associated with that, because he's been playing absolutely horrible as of late and is still averaging 16.5 fantasy points per game. But it could be so much worse. As of right now, he has outscored the likes of Geno Smith, Brock Purdy, Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence, and Joe Burrow. I get the disappointment so far, for sure, but just don't overreact to it too early in the season. Which will then take us to Sunday Night Football, the Pittsburgh Steelers and Las Vegas Raiders, and this is what you would call a mid-off, right? Middle tier guys that don't suck, but they aren't great. And we'll start with Kenny Pickett on the Pittsburgh Steelers side. Now, a large chunk of his production last week came off a long run after the catch by George Pickens. The Steelers, though, overall still having a hard time struggling to get into the end zone consistently, and we're still looking at Kenny Pickett having more turnovers than touchdowns. Now, don't get me wrong, it was great to see George Pickens kind of thrive as being the number one guy with no Deontay Johnson. And in this matchup, honestly, they could have a chance to do even better. Las Vegas allows 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. We really need to see the higher touchdown upside, though, in this offense, some more consistency week to week, before we really trust starting Kenny Pickett. There are just way too many quarterbacks out there that are scoring consistent points week in and week out that I would rather start. Now, for the Las Vegas Raiders side of things, to avoid sounding like a broken record, you could literally almost say the exact same things for Jimmy G. Too many turnovers, not enough touchdowns, yet to really see a ceiling there. And now he gets to face off against the Steelers defense that looked way better in week 2 than it did in week 1. I don't know if the offensive line of the Las Vegas Raiders is going to be able to protect Jimmy G long enough this week to really let anything happen down the field. Another guy that has just way too much risk to start. That'll then take us to the Monday night doubleheader here once again. First game going to be pretty good. Philadelphia Eagles, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I could almost feel the release of the sphincter of Jalen Hurts owners after week 2, especially when we continue to see the tush push on the goal line and rushing touchdowns for Jalen Hurts. We already know we start him each and every week. But what about the Bake Show? Baker Mayfield. Is it just me, or is Baker looking pretty damn good in Tampa Bay? Him and Mike Evans have the connection that Brady wished he had with Evans in Tampa Bay. Now, through 2 games of this season, Baker's already got 500 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers, completing almost 70% of his passes, and now he gets to play at home on Monday Night Football against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I know that matchup sounds bad, but Philadelphia is allowing more fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks than any other team in the league at 26.9 per game. This is really going to go one of 2 ways for Baker Mayfield. I can just feel it. Dude is going to go out and score 30, or he's going to score 6. A total boom or bust play, in my opinion. More of a QB2 in like 2 quarterback leagues and super flex leagues, but if this dude goes off, he's going to have a monumental rise in the rankings come week 4. Which will then take us to the last game of the week. We have the Los Angeles Rams, Cincinnati Bengals. And should we be preparing to not have Joe Burrow this week? He re-aggravated the calf strain that he had earlier in the preseason. But given the fact that the Bengals are already 0-2, do they have time to rest him? Vegas kind of thinks there's a chance of that because they've started to move this line down more and more as time goes on. Now, I don't want to say that Joe Burrow is some must-sit quarterback as of right now, but the risk is real. And if you own Joe Burrow, I am making sure that I have a good insurance policy ready to go just in case, especially since he's going up against the Rams, whose defense has started off pretty freaking good this year. They've allowed only 11.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks and have allowed the 5th fewest passing yards per game through the first 2 weeks of the season. This is definitely for sure going to be an uphill battle for Joey B. It's all about his health, and if he's limited, he could continue to hurt your fantasy team until he gets 100% healthy. He's definitely a name we're paying close attention to as the week goes on. As for Matthew Stafford, starting to look like vintage Stafford here just a little bit, averaging 320 yards passing a game, and a lot of it in thanks to the damn Pikachu show out there, Puka Nacua. Between him sucking up everything underneath and then moving the ball deeper down the field to Tutu Atwell, Stafford's having no issues racking up some yards, but the issue here is his volume really isn't resulting in a whole lot of touchdowns, and that's what's keeping him on fantasy benches. Cincinnati, though, they're allowing over 22 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, mostly because of the rushing upside they've had to deal with Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson over the last couple of weeks. Now, I think we can all agree that we don't have to worry about the rushing upside of Matthew Stafford. I'm also not going to sleep on the potential of Stafford this week in this matchup. He in no way is a safe start this week on Monday Night Football. However, he's going to be a lot higher in my rankings this week than he has been each of the last 2 weeks. Once we start seeing more touchdowns in this offense, that's when we start contemplating starting Matthew Stafford. All right, that's going to do it for my quarterback starts and sits here for week 3 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you a little bit of information to make your decision making a little bit easier. If you find yourself staring between 2 quarterbacks and you don't know which one is best, don't worry. Remember, our rankings will drop Thursday morning to help you make those final decisions, but I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day and then do your part to make the world a better place.